The alarm screamed through the corridors of Nexus Prime for the third time that week. Station workers froze at their posts, knowing exactly what that sound meant. Keithrak was having another episode. In the central laboratory wing, Dr. Vex High pressed his blue-scaled hands against his head fins. The Aquarian scientist had been working on delicate crystal formations when the alarm started. Now he would have to start over again. Everyone knew the drill. When Keithrak lost control, it was best to hide and wait. The young Predotar stood 8 feet tall, even though he was barely past his first molting season. His dark green scales rippled with muscle, as rage built inside him like a volcano about to explode. His yellow eyes glowed brighter with each passing second. The breathing masks that most species needed in the station's atmosphere hung broken around his thick neck. Predotars could breathe almost anything. Station Administrator Koralthek watched the security screens from his office with growing worry. The elderly Zenthan's forearms moved quickly across his control panel, sealing off sections of the station. His purple skin had turned pale with stress. In his 50 years of running Nexus Prime, he had never seen anything like Keithrak. The trouble had started in the engineering bay. Senior Engineer Pol Win, a gentle creature from the Mithron colonies, had been explaining how the quantum processors worked. His soft, singing voice was meant to be calming. Most species found Mithran speech beautiful and peaceful, but something about the frequency made Keithrak's scales stand on end. First came the low growling. Pol Win had seen this before and tried to back away slowly. But today was different. Today, the machinery in the engineering bay was running a diagnostic cycle. The high-pitched whining of the quantum cores mixed with Pol Win's voice in a way that sent Keithrak over the edge. The transformation was terrifying to watch. Keithrak's breathing became deep and fast. His claws extended from his fingertips with sharp clicks. The muscles in his arms and legs swelled as ancient battle instincts took over. For a moment, he looked less like a young student and more like the apex predator his people had evolved from. Pol Win tried to run, but Predotars were built for hunting. Keithrak moved faster than something his size should be able to. His clawed hand swept across a control panel, sending sparks flying. Metal groaned and bent under his grip. The sweet smell of burning circuits filled the air. Security arrived within minutes, but they knew better than to use weapons. Stunning a Predotar in full rage could stop his heart. Instead, they activated the emergency force fields, trapping Keithrak in the engineering bay until his fury burned itself out. It took 2 hours. For 2 long hours, the station's most important systems ran on backup power, while Keithrak destroyed everything he could reach. When it was over, he collapsed on the floor, surrounded by twisted metal and broken glass. His scales had returned to normal color, but his eyes still glowed with leftover anger. This was not the first time. Keithrak had been on Nexus Prime for 6 months, and there had been 17 episodes. 17 times the station had gone into emergency lockdown. 17 times they had to rebuild or repair whatever he had destroyed. The Predotar government had sent him here with high hopes. Their species was known throughout the galaxy as the greatest warriors ever born. They could fight in any environment and never back down from a challenge. But they were also trying to change. The endless wars of their past had nearly destroyed their homeworld. Now they wanted to learn science and diplomacy instead of just warfare. Keithrak was supposed to be their first step toward this new future. He was smart and came from an important family. His parents had hoped that studying among peaceful species would help him control the rage that burned in every Predotar's blood. Instead, he was failing worse than anyone had imagined. 3 different mentors had tried to work with him. Dr. Yilmoth, a wise old Brahmin with centuries of teaching experience, had lasted 2 weeks before giving up. The Christine scholar Zeph Ara had tried using meditation techniques from her homeworld. Keithrak had broken her crystal focus stones during a rage and nearly hurt her with the sharp pieces. Most recently, they had tried pairing him with Commander Torkvan, a military advisor from the hegemony. The tough old soldier had dealt with difficult students before, but even he admitted defeat after Keithrak destroyed an entire training room. Now, Administrator Koralthek faced an impossible choice. The other station residents were getting scared. Some had requested transfers to other facilities. The Mithran engineers were talking about filing a formal complaint. Even the hardy Zenthen maintenance crews were nervous around the young Predotar. Koralthek looked at the damage reports from today's episode. The engineering bay would need a complete rebuild. The quantum processors were beyond repair. It would cost thousands of credits and take weeks to fix everything. But sending Keithrak home would be worse than expensive. It would be the end of hope for his entire species. The Predotar ruling council had made it clear that if their first student failed, they would abandon their peaceful efforts. They would return to the old ways of solving problems with claws and teeth. The administrator's personal communicator buzzed. A message from the Predotar homeworld appeared on his screen. It was short and to the point. Council meeting in 10 days. Kithrak's progress will be evaluated. Failure means immediate return. Koralthek closed his 4 eyes and sighed deeply. 10 days to find a miracle. 10 days to somehow fix what 3 experts had failed to solve in 6 months. He looked back at the security screens, where cleaning crews were carefully entering the destroyed engineering bay. Somewhere in the station's research wings, work continued as normal. Scientists from dozens of species studied everything from quantum physics to alien biology. They had come together from across the galaxy to learn and share knowledge in peace, but none of them knew how to save one angry young Predotar from himself. And none of them knew that their failure might doom an entire species to return to endless war. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived at Nexus Prime 3 days after the engineering bay incident. She was tired from the long journey through 3 different hyperspace jumps, but excited about her new research project. As the shuttle docked with the station, she pressed her face to the small window and marveled at the massive structure spinning slowly in space. Sarah was small compared to most of the alien species on the station. At 5.5 feet tall, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, she looked very ordinary. But her work was anything but ordinary. She was one of Earth's leading experts on how different species heard and understood sound. Her specialty was ethnomusicology, the study of music in different cultures. But Sarah had taken it further than any human before her. She wanted to understand how alien minds processed rhythm, melody, and harmony. Her research could help improve communication between species and maybe even lead to new forms of universal art. The first sign that something was wrong came when she met Administrator Koralthek. The elderly Zenthen seemed nervous, constantly looking over his shoulders with all 4 eyes. His purple skin had an unhealthy pale color, and his hands shook slightly as he reviewed her paperwork. "Dr. Chen," he said in carefully spoken English, "I must ask you to be very careful during your stay. We have a situation that requires all residents to follow safety protocols." Sarah nodded politely, but she was curious. In her research, she had visited dangerous places before. She had recorded war songs in active combat zones and studied funeral chants in plague-affected worlds. "What kind of situation?" Quote, Koralthek's skin grew even paler. "A student. A young Predotar named Keithrak. He has emotional difficulties. When he loses control, he becomes very dangerous. If you hear the alarm, please go to the nearest safe room immediately." As if summoned by their conversation, the alarm began to wail. Koralthek jumped and started pressing buttons on his communicator. "Lockdown Protocol 7, he shouted into the device. "All personnel to safe zones." But Sarah did not run. Instead, she listened. The alarm had a specific pattern: 3 long tones followed by 2 short ones. Underneath it, she could hear something else, footsteps that were too heavy for most species, a low rumbling sound that was almost like singing, but full of anger. "Which way?" she asked. Koralthek looked at her like she had gone insane. "Which way to what?" "To the student. To Keithrak. Dr. Chen. You do not understand. When he rages, he could kill you without meaning to. His people are natural predators. Please, come with me to the safe room." Sarah shook her head. "I need to see this. It's what I do. I study how emotions affect sound and behavior. This could be important." Before the administrator could stop her, Sarah was walking toward the source of the noise. Her small size and quick movements helped her avoid the security teams that were running in the opposite direction. She followed the sounds through the station's corridors. The rumbling grew louder, and she began to hear other noises too. Metal bending and breaking. The sharp crack of something expensive being destroyed. And underneath it all, a rhythm. Sarah found him in the station's main cafeteria. Keithrak stood in the center of the large room, surrounded by overturned tables and scattered food. His dark green scales rippled with each movement, and his yellow eyes blazed like small suns. He was magnificent and terrifying at the same time, but Sarah was not afraid. She was fascinated. Most people seeing Keithrak would focus on his size or his claws or the destruction around him. Sarah heard something different. She heard the pattern in his breathing. She noticed how his movements almost matched the rhythm of the station's life support systems. She saw how he was fighting against something invisible, like a dancer struggling with music only he could hear. Keithrak grabbed another table and hurled it across the room. It crashed into the wall and broke into pieces. But as he threw it, Sarah heard him make a sound. Not a roar or a growl, but something that was almost musical. A note of pure frustration and pain. She pulled out her portable recorder and began documenting everything. The frequency of his breathing, the patterns in his movements, the way certain sounds from the station's machinery seemed to make his rage worse. For 20 minutes, she watched and listened while Keithrak destroyed the cafeteria. Security teams surrounded the room, but they kept their distance. Through her earpiece, she could hear them talking about stun weapons and sedatives. They were treating him like a dangerous animal, but Sarah saw something else. In between the moments of pure rage, Keithrak would pause. For just a few seconds, his yellow eyes would dim, and he would look around as if he was confused about where he was. In those moments, he looked less like a monster, and more like a scared young person who did not understand what was happening to him. When it was finally over, Keithrak collapsed onto his knees among the wreckage. His scales lost their angry color, and his breathing slowed to normal. The yellow glow in his eyes faded, leaving them looking almost golden instead of fierce. For the first time, Sarah could see how young he really was. The security teams moved in carefully with restraint fields and medical scanners. They treated him gently, she noticed. Whatever they thought about his rages, they cared about his well-being. One of the medical officers, a tall blue being with gentle movements, checked Keithrak's vital signs and spoke to him in soft, reassuring tones. Sarah approached the medical officer after they moved Keithrak to the medical bay. "Excuse me. I'm Dr. Chen. I was observing the episode. Can you tell me more about his condition?" Dr. Yithvera looked surprised. "You were watching? That was very dangerous, Dr. Chen. Keithrak cannot control himself during these episodes. I noticed that. But I also noticed other things. Has anyone studied the patterns in his behavior? The way he responds to different sounds?" The medical officer's blue skin darkened with confusion. "Sounds? We have focused on biological factors. His brain chemistry, his hormone levels, his genetic predisposition to violence." Sarah nodded. "Those are important. But I think there might be another factor. I study how different species process audio input. What if Keithrak's problem is not just emotional, but sensory?" That night, Sarah reviewed her recordings. She analyzed the sound patterns from the station during Keithrak's episode. She studied the frequency of his movements and breathing. What she found made her sit up straight in her small quarters. The station's environmental systems, SAA, the air recyclers, the artificial gravity generators, the quantum processors, all produced sounds. Most species had learned to ignore these background noises. But what if Keithrak could not ignore them? What if his Predotar hearing was so sensitive that the constant noise was driving him slowly insane? Sarah smiled and began making notes. Tomorrow, she would request a meeting with Administrator Koralthek. She had an idea that might just save everyone. For 5 days, Sarah watched and studied. She spent hours in the station's sound monitoring center, learning about every noise that Nexus Prime produced. The artificial gravity generators hummed at 47.3 Hz. The air recycling systems pulsed at irregular intervals. The quantum processors created high-frequency whines that most species could not even hear, but Predotars had evolved as hunters. Their hearing was far more sensitive than humans realized. Sarah also studied Keithrak from a distance. She watched him during his calm periods, noting how he moved through the station. He avoided certain corridors where the machinery was loudest. He ate his meals quickly in the cafeteria, always choosing tables far from the kitchen equipment. When he tried to sleep, he would cover his large, pointed ears with his hands. The pattern was clear. Keithrak was not just angry, he was in constant pain from sounds that others barely noticed. On the 6th day, Sarah was ready to test her theory. She had convinced Administrator Koralvek to let her try, though he was very nervous about it. Dr. Chen, if you are wrong, if he hurts you, I will have to answer to both the human and Predator governments. I understand the risk, Sarah said, checking her equipment one more time. But I think I understand what's causing his episodes. If I'm right, this could help him. Sarah had prepared carefully. She wore noise-canceling headphones that could block most of the station's background sounds. In her bag, she carried a second pair modified for Predotar anatomy. She also had a small music player, loaded with carefully selected songs. The opportunity came when Keithrak was in the station's library, trying to study. The library was supposed to be quiet, but the quantum computer cores were directly below it. To most species, the humming was barely noticeable. To Keithrak, it must have been like trying to read during an earthquake. Sarah watched from across the room as frustration built in the young Predator. His breathing grew faster. His claws clicked against the table. The scales on his arms began to rise slightly, an early warning sign that his friends at the station had learned to recognize. Then the main computer decided to run a diagnostic cycle. The humming grew louder and shifted to a higher frequency. Keithrak's hands went to his ears, and his yellow eyes began to glow. This was it. Sarah stood up and walked calmly toward him. Other library users saw her coming and quietly left the area. They knew what was about to happen. Keithrak rose from his chair, now fully 8 feet tall and radiating dangerous energy. His breathing became the deep, rhythmic pattern that meant he was losing control. Sarah could see his muscles swelling as his body prepared for violence. But instead of running away, she kept walking toward him. And instead of shouting or making sudden movements, she began to speak in a calm, measured voice. Keithrak, she said, matching the rhythm of her words to his breathing. I know it hurts. I know the sounds are too loud. He looked at her with glowing eyes, but something in her tone made him pause. Sarah continued walking forward, one slow step at a time. I have something that might help, she said, still keeping her voice rhythmic and calm. Something to make the noise stop. Keithrak's claws extended, but he did not attack. He was listening, even through his rage. Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out the modified headphones. These will make it quiet, she said. Like closing your eyes, but for your ears. She was close enough now that he could easily reach her. Close enough that one swipe of his claws could end her life. But Sarah was not afraid. She had spent her whole career learning to understand how beings communicated through sound. This was just another form of communication. Slowly, carefully, she reached up toward his head. Keithrak could have stopped her easily, but he did not move. Something about her calm confidence seemed to freeze him in place. The headphones were designed for human ears, but Sarah had modified them during her week of preparation. She had studied Predator anatomy and adjusted the size and shape to fit over Keithrak's large, pointed ears. The moment the headphones covered his ears, the change was dramatic. Keithrak's glowing eyes dimmed. His breathing slowed. The tension in his muscles began to fade. For the first time since coming to the station, he experienced real silence. He looked at Sarah with wonder instead of rage. His claws retracted. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and confused. The noise is gone, he said in heavily accented standard. How? Sarah smiled and gestured for him to sit down. These headphones block sound waves. They create a quiet space around your ears. I think the station's machinery has been hurting your hearing for months. Keithrak sat heavily in his chair, still wearing the headphones. I did not know it could stop. I thought the pain was normal. It's not normal for humans, Sarah said. And I don't think it should be normal for Predotars either. Your people evolved different hearing than ours. What seems like background noise to us might be very loud to you. For several minutes, they sat together in the library. Keithrak kept touching the headphones, amazed that the constant noise in his head had finally stopped. Sarah watched his body language change as the stress left his system. "Dr. Chen," he said finally, "why did you help me? Everyone else runs when I lose control." Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Because I could hear that you were in pain. Not angry pain, but confused pain. Like someone trying to think while being shouted at." She reached into her bag again and pulled out her music player. "I have something else I want to try. My species discovered something long ago. Sometimes, the right sounds can make us feel better instead of worse." She connected the music player to his headphones and selected a simple instrumental piece. Nothing too complex, just a gentle piano melody that she had chosen specifically for its mathematical structure and calming rhythm. The effect on Keithrak was immediate. His eyes widened, and his whole body relaxed in a way that Sarah had never seen before. He listened to the entire song without moving, as if he was afraid that any motion would make the beautiful sounds stop. When the song ended, there were tears in his yellow eyes. "Music," Sarah said simply. "My species creates patterns of sound for pleasure and emotional expression. We call it music." "We have nothing like this," Keithrak said, wiping the tears from his face. "Predators make sounds for communication or intimidation. But this was beautiful," Sarah smiled. "There are thousands of different types of human music. Each one creates different emotions. Would you like to hear more?" For the next 2 hours, Sarah introduced Keithrak to the basics of human music. She started with simple melodies and gradually worked up to more complex pieces. She explained rhythm, harmony, and melody in terms he could understand. And for the first time since coming to Nexus Prime, Keithrak spent an entire afternoon without having a single episode of rage. Word spread quickly through the station. The angry young Predator had spent a peaceful day in the library with the human doctor. No alarms. No destroyed furniture. No terrified staff members hiding in safe rooms. Administrator Koralthek could hardly believe the reports. When he finally saw the security footage of Sarah calmly approaching an enraged Keithrak and somehow calming him down, he had to watch it 3 times to convince himself it was real. That night, Sarah sent her first report back to Earth. She was careful not to promise too much, but she was optimistic. The breakthrough they had made today was just the beginning. If she was right, music might be the key to helping not just Keithrak, but possibly other Predators as well. In his quarters, Keithrak lay on his sleeping platform with the modified headphones still covering his ears. For the first time in months, he fell asleep without covering his head with pillows to muffle the station's noise. And for the first time since he was a very small cub, he dreamed about something other than violence. The next 3 weeks changed everything. Sarah met with Keithrak every day in the library. She had turned one corner of the quiet space into an informal music laboratory. Her equipment was simple. Just a music player, several sets of headphones, and a collection of human music from across Earth's history. But the results were extraordinary. Keithrak learned fast. His Predotar mind, built for analyzing threats and tracking prey, was perfectly suited for understanding the complex patterns in music. Sarah started with simple melodies, but within days she was introducing him to Bach's mathematical compositions and Mozart's intricate harmonies. The change in his behavior was dramatic. His rage episodes went from happening every few days to once a week, then once every 2 weeks. By the end of the 3rd week, Keithrak had gone 10 days without a single outburst. More importantly, he was learning to communicate in new ways. Before, when Keithrak tried to express frustration, it would build up inside him until it exploded into violence. Now, Sarah was teaching him to recognize different emotions and match them to different types of music. When he felt angry, they listened to powerful orchestral pieces that let him experience controlled intensity without destruction. When he felt confused, they explored jazz improvisation that showed him how complex problems could be solved through creative thinking. The day that changed everything was when Sarah introduced him to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. "This is special," she told him as she set up the recording. The composer who wrote this was deaf when he created it. He could not hear the sounds, but he understood the patterns so well that he could imagine them perfectly. Keithrack listened with his usual intense focus. The symphony was longer than anything she had played for him before, over an hour of music. But as the famous Ode to Joy movement began, something amazing happened. Tears started flowing from Keithrack's yellow eyes. Not tears of pain or frustration, but something entirely new. When the music ended, he sat silently for several minutes. "Dr. Chen," he said finally, "what is this feeling? This is not anger, or fear, or hunger. What does your species call this?" Sarah felt her own eyes growing damp. "We call it joy. It means happiness that comes from something beautiful or wonderful. It means feeling connected to something larger than yourself." Keithrack wiped the tears from his face with the back of his large hand. "We have no word for this in Predotar language. We have words for victory and satisfaction and the pleasure of a successful hunt. But this is different. Music creates new emotions," Sarah explained. "Sometimes we feel things through music that we cannot feel any other way." That afternoon, something unprecedented happened. Keithrack approached 3 other station residents and apologized for frightening them during his previous episodes. He spoke slowly and carefully, choosing his words with the same attention he now gave to listening to music. The Mithran engineer Polwin was amazed. "I have never heard a Predotar apologize before," he told Administrator Korlthek later. "Their culture does not usually admit weakness or regret, but Keithrack's transformation brought unexpected challenges." Word of his progress had reached the Predotar homeworld. The ruling council, which had been preparing to recall him in disgrace, was now worried about something else. They had heard reports that their promising young warrior was becoming soft and corrupted by alien influences. 3 days after the Beethoven session, a Predotar ship arrived at Nexus Prime. It carried 5 members of the High War Council, the most powerful leaders of the Predotar people. They came to evaluate Keithrack's condition and determine if he was still suitable to represent their species. The council members were everything that Keithrack was learning not to be. They were older, larger, and carried themselves with the confident aggression that Predotar society valued above all else. Their leader, War Chief Taktor, stood nearly 9 feet tall and bore scars from dozens of battles. "Show us this cub," Thoktor demanded when he met with Administrator Korlthek. "Show us what the soft species have done to our future warrior." The confrontation came during one of Sarah's music sessions. She was introducing Keithrack to human folk songs, simple melodies that told stories of ordinary people and everyday emotions. They were listening to an old ballad about a farmer who missed his home when Thoktor and the council entered the library. The war chief looked at Keithrack sitting peacefully with headphones over his ears, and his expression filled with disgust. "This is what has become of Predotar strength, sitting quietly like a pet while alien sounds poison your mind?" Keithrack removed his headphones and stood to face the council. But instead of the automatic aggression that Predotar culture demanded, he moved slowly and kept his voice calm. "Honored War Chief, I have learned new ways to understand emotion and control my responses." "Control?" Thoktor's scales darkened with anger. "A Predotar does not control rage, he uses it. Rage is our strength, our weapon, our gift from the ancestors." Sarah watched nervously as the confrontation developed. She could see the old patterns trying to reassert themselves in Keithrack's behavior. His breathing grew faster, and his scales began to shift color, but something was different now. Instead of losing control, Keithrack seemed to be listening to something inside his head. Sarah realized he was remembering the music they had studied, using the rhythms and patterns to organize his thoughts. "War Chief," Keithrack said carefully, "rage without purpose is not strength, it is chaos. The human Dr. Chen has shown me that emotion can be powerful without being destructive." Thoktor stepped closer, using his size to intimidate. "The human has made you weak. You apologize to prey species, You sit quietly instead of asserting dominance. You have forgotten what it means to be Predotar. The other council members circled around Keithrak, their scales bristling with disapproval. Sarah wanted to intervene, but she knew this was something Keithrak had to face himself. "I have not forgotten," Keithrak said, and now there was something new in his voice. Not anger, but a kind of strength that Sarah had never heard before. "I have learned that being Predotar means more than just fighting. It means understanding the complexity of existence." War Chief Toktor growled with frustration. "Enough of this alien philosophy. We return to the homeworld tomorrow. Your education in weakness is finished." That night, Sarah found Keithrak sitting alone in the observation deck, looking out at the stars without his headphones. She could see the conflict in his posture. The old patterns of aggression fighting against everything he had learned. "They want to take me back," he said without looking at her. "They think music has made me unfit to be a warrior." Sarah sat beside him, choosing her words carefully. "Music hasn't made you weak, Keithrak. It's made you complete. You're still strong, but now you understand that there are different kinds of strength. The council will never accept that," he said sadly. "To them, any emotion except rage is a flaw." Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about everything they had accomplished together. Then she smiled. "Maybe it's time to show them what they've been missing." She pulled out her music player and selected a piece she had been saving for the right moment. It was a recording of a human military orchestra playing a piece called Mars, the Bringer of War. Powerful music that captured both the strength of warriors and the tragedy of warfare. As the music played through the observation deck's speakers, something wonderful happened. Keithrak began to hum along, his deep voice adding harmonies that no human throat could produce. The sound was beautiful and alien and somehow perfect. "Tomorrow," Sarah said when the music ended, "we'll show them that being Predotar and loving music are not opposites. We'll show them what their people could become." Keithrak looked at her with hope returning to his golden eyes. "You think they will understand?" Sarah smiled. "Music is a universal language, Keithrak. Even the angriest warrior can learn to appreciate harmony." The confrontation was set for the main assembly hall. War Chief Thoktor had demanded a public demonstration of Keithrak's fitness to be a Predotar warrior. Every resident of Nexus Prime was invited to witness what the council expected would be their young representative's humiliation and return to proper Predotar behavior. Administrator Koralthek had tried to prevent the gathering, fearing for everyone's safety, but the Predotar Council had the right to evaluate their student, and they insisted the test would prove that alien influences had corrupted him beyond redemption. Sarah stood at the back of the large hall, her heart pounding with nervousness. She carried her music equipment, but she was not sure she would get a chance to use it. The 5 council members sat in the front row, their massive forms radiating disapproval and barely contained aggression. Keithrak entered the hall alone, without his headphones for the first time in weeks. Sarah could see the strain on his face as the station's background noise hit his sensitive ears, but he walked steadily to the center of the room, his posture straight and dignified. "Members of the War Council," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I understand you have concerns about my development here on Nexus Prime." War Chief Thoktor stood up, towering over everyone in the room. "We have more than concerns, young cub. We have witnessed you abandoning everything that makes our people strong. You apologize to lesser species. You sit quietly when you should assert dominance. Worst of all, you fill your mind with alien noise instead of focusing on combat training." The other council members rose to their feet, forming a semicircle around Keithrak. Sarah recognized the formation. It was a traditional Predotar challenge circle, used when a warrior's honor needed to be tested. "We will give you one chance to prove you remain worthy of our bloodline," Thoktor continued. "Show us your rage. Show us the fury that burns in every true Predotar's heart. Attack us as your ancestors would have. And perhaps we can repair the damage these soft species have done to your spirit." The hall fell silent except for the humming of the station's machinery. Sarah watched in growing horror as she realized what the council wanted. They were trying to trigger one of Keithrak's old episodes, expecting him to lose control and attack them in a blind fury. But something had changed fundamentally in the young Predotar. Instead of feeling his rage building, Keithrak stood calmly in the center of the challenge circle. His breathing remained steady. His scales kept their normal color. "Honored war chief," he said quietly, "I will not attack you." Thoktor's eyes began to glow with anger. "Then you are not Predotar. You are a broken thing, corrupted by weakness." The council members began to move closer, their own rage building as they prepared to demonstrate what a real Predotar looked like. Sarah could see their muscles swelling, their claws extending. In moments, they would trigger their own battle fury and show everyone in the hall why the Predotar were feared throughout the galaxy. That was when Keithrak did something that no one expected. He began to sing. The sound that came from his throat was unlike anything anyone had ever heard. It was deep and resonant, with harmonics that seemed to vibrate through the floor and walls of the station. But it was not the wordless howl of rage that Predotars sometimes made in battle. This was music. Keithrak was weaving together melodies that Sarah had taught him, but transforming them with something uniquely Predotar. Bach's mathematical precision blended with the rhythmic power of his own heartbeat. Beethoven's emotional complexity mixed with ancient hunting songs that lived in his genetic memory. The effect on the council members was immediate and shocking. Their advance stopped. Their eyes, which had been glowing with rage, began to dim with confusion. One by one, they lowered their claws and stood listening with expressions of amazement, because somewhere in Keithrak's song, they heard something they had forgotten. Something that had been lost in centuries of warfare and aggression. They heard the voice of their people before they became only warriors. They heard the sound of Predotars who had once created as well as destroyed. War Chief Thaktor was the last to stop moving. But even he eventually stood transfixed. Tears began to flow from his battle-scarred eyes. The first tears he had shed since he was a small cub. Keithrak sang for nearly 10 minutes, his voice growing stronger and more complex as he continued. He sang about the pain of constant noise and the joy of silence. He sang about the beauty of mathematics and the power of controlled emotion. He sang about a future where Predotars could be both strong and wise, both fierce and compassionate. When the song finally ended, the hall remained silent for a long moment. Then War Chief Thaktor did something that shocked everyone present. He knelt. "Forgive me, young one," the old warrior said, his voice thick with emotion. "I came here to save you from weakness, but I see now that you have found a strength I never knew existed." The other council members also knelt, their massive forms bowing to the young Predotar who had shown them a new way to be proud of their heritage. "How is this possible?" asked Council Member Vex Wrath, the oldest of the group. "How can sounds create such feelings of peace and power at the same time?" Keithrak looked across the hall to Sarah, who was wiping tears from her own eyes. "Dr. Chen taught me that music is a universal language. It speaks to parts of our minds that words cannot reach. It shows us emotions we did not know we could feel." Sarah stepped forward, no longer afraid of the massive Predotars. "Your people have incredible voices," she told the council. "Keithrak's song was more beautiful than any human music I know. With training, Predotars could become the greatest musicians in the galaxy." War Chief Thaktor stood up slowly, his entire worldview shifting in real time. "We have spent so many centuries focused on war that we forgot our people once made beauty as well as conquest. The ancient songs of our ancestors. We thought they were just primitive noise. They were not noise," Keithrak said gently. "They were the beginning of what we could become." Over the following days, the council members stayed on Nexus Prime to learn more about music and its possibilities. Sarah worked with each of them, discovering that their deep voices and sensitive hearing made them natural musicians once they learned to control their emotional responses. The transformation was remarkable. These feared warriors, who had spent their lives perfecting the art of violence, revealed a capacity for beauty that amazed everyone who witnessed it. 6 months later, the first Predotar Cultural Exchange Center opened on their homeworld. Young Predotars came from across their space to study music alongside traditional warrior training. They learned that strength could be expressed through harmony as well as combat, and that true power came from understanding rather than just dominating. Sarah became the first human to receive Predotar citizenship, honored not as a warrior, but as a singer of new paths. She divided her time between Earth and the Predotar homeworld, establishing programs that taught music therapy to help other young Predotars who struggled with the same sensory issues that had once tormented Keithrak. Keithrak himself became something unprecedented in Predotar society. A warrior poet whose songs helped heal the psychological wounds left by centuries of constant warfare. He composed symphonies that told the stories of battles, but focused on the courage and sacrifice of individual soldiers, rather than just the glory of victory. The other species of the galaxy watched in amazement as the most feared warrior race in known space transformed themselves into something new. The Predotars remained strong and proud, but they added wisdom and beauty to their strength. And it all began because one small human woman heard the pain in a young alien's rage and knew that music could heal what violence could not touch. Years later, when diplomats from across the galaxy gathered for peace negotiations, they would often invite Predotar singers to perform. The deep, resonant voices that had once struck terror into enemy hearts now created harmony that helped different species find common ground. Sarah would listen to these performances with deep satisfaction, knowing that she had helped unlock something beautiful that had been hiding inside one of the galaxy's most dangerous peoples. She had proven once again that humanity's greatest gift was not superior technology or physical prowess, but the ability to see potential for growth and connection, even in the most unlikely places. The universe was a little more beautiful because one angry young Predotar had learned to sing instead of only fight, and it was a little more peaceful because his people had remembered that true strength comes from creating harmony, not just winning battles.